Have you ever had one of those weeks where it felt like everything went wrong? Maybe you bombed a test you thought you were ready for. Maybe you sent in a job application and never heard back. Maybe you promised yourself you'd start that new habit on Monday, but by Wednesday it was already out the window. By Friday, you're sitting there, scrolling through your phone, feeling this heavy mix of frustration and guilt, telling yourself, I failed again. If you've ever felt that way, let me tell you something important. You're not broken, and you're definitely not alone. Every single person you look up to, whether it's an athlete, an entrepreneur, an artist, or even that classmate who seems to have it all figured out, they all fail, regularly. The difference is not that they avoid failure. The difference is that they've learned how to pull gold out of their setbacks instead of letting those setbacks bury them. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. I call it Fail Forward Fridays. Think of it as a weekly ritual, a habit where instead of running away from the things that didn't go your way, you sit down and mine them for lessons. Just like a miner sifts through piles of dirt and rocks to find nuggets of gold, you sift through the disappointments and mistakes of your week to uncover the insights that will move you forward. Because here's the truth, failure by itself teaches you nothing. People say, failure is the best teacher, but that's only half the story. Failure is only the best teacher if you take the time to stop, reflect, and actually learn. Otherwise, it's just pain without progress. The good news is, you don't need hours of self-reflection, and you don't need to write an entire essay about your mistakes. All it takes is a simple, intentional process that you can do at the end of your week, and over time, this little practice can completely shift the way you see yourself and your future. So let's start right here. Imagine it's Friday evening. Instead of just numbing out with Netflix or scrolling through endless videos to distract yourself from what didn't go well, you grab a notebook, or even just the Notes app on your phone. The first step is brutally simple. You write down your biggest setback of the week. Not a list of 20 things, not every little detail, just one main thing that stung the most. Maybe it was failing an exam. Maybe it was skipping the gym all week. Maybe it was freezing up in a meeting and not speaking when you had something valuable to say. Pick the one thing that's been echoing in your mind. Now, here's where the magic starts. Instead of beating yourself up, instead of saying, I'm just lazy or I'm just not good enough, you treat that setback like a clue. You ask yourself, what is this failure trying to teach me? And I want you to notice the shift here, because the moment you change the question, you change the story. It's no longer about you being inadequate. It's about the failure carrying a hidden message, and your job is to uncover it. For example, let's say your biggest setback was bombing a test. You could sit there and wallow in guilt, or you could say, okay, what is this teaching me? Maybe the lesson is that cramming the night before doesn't work for you. Maybe it's that you need to ask more questions in class instead of pretending you understand. Or maybe the real lesson is that you're studying something you don't even care about, and that lack of interest is showing up in your performance. Do you see how suddenly the failure is no longer a dead end? It's a signpost pointing you somewhere? Or imagine you skipped the gym all week. On the surface, you might call yourself lazy. But if you pause and dig into it, maybe you realize the real reason is that you scheduled workouts at times when your energy is always low. Or maybe you expected yourself to do an hour-long session every day, which felt overwhelming, so you did nothing. In that case, the lesson isn't I'm weak. The lesson is I need to design smaller, more realistic workouts that fit my life. Again, the failure turns into fuel for progress. This is the heart of Fail Forward Fridays, turning setbacks into teachers instead of punishers. Because the problem with most of us is that we let failure define us instead of refine us. We wear our mistakes like labels. I failed that test, so I'm stupid. I didn't get that job, so I'm not valuable. I broke my streak, so I have no discipline. But none of those labels are the truth. They're just stories we tell ourselves when we don't take time to separate the lesson from the pain. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking. Okay, but sometimes my failures just feel pointless. Sometimes I don't see any lesson in them at all. And I get that. Not every setback has a neat little takeaway wrapped with a bow. But even then, there's always something small you can pull from the experience. Maybe the lesson is simply resilience, that you can fall and get back up. Maybe it's patience, that progress takes longer than you thought. Or maybe the lesson is humility, that you're still growing, and that's okay. The point isn't to find some deep, life-changing insight every single Friday. The point is to train your brain to respond differently to setbacks. Instead of shutting down, you start asking, what's the gold in this? And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. Over time, your failures stop feeling like permanent roadblocks and start feeling like stepping stones. This little ritual also does something else that's incredibly powerful. It changes the way you look at risk. When you know that failure isn't the end but just part of your learning cycle, you become more willing to try new things. You stop being paralyzed by the fear of messing up, because you know that even if you do, you'll mine the gold from it and keep moving forward. That's how people grow. Not by avoiding mistakes, but by embracing them and learning faster than everyone else. So as you sit with your biggest setback of the week, write it down, look at it honestly, and then ask yourself, what can I take from this that will help me move forward stronger? Sometimes the answer will be practical, like a new study strategy or a better routine. Sometimes it will be emotional, like realizing you've been too hard on yourself and need to give yourself grace. Both are valuable. Both are gold. And once you've pulled that lesson out, there's one more important step. Carry it with you into the next week. Don't just leave it on the page. Turn it into a small action. If the lesson was that cramming doesn't work, then maybe next week you start reviewing notes for just 10 minutes a day. If the lesson was that your workouts were unrealistic, maybe next week you commit to just 2 15-minute sessions. If the lesson was that fear held you back, maybe next week you set one tiny challenge that pushes you out of your comfort zone. Small, simple, consistent, that's how you turn Friday failures into next week's wins. Now that we've explored how to identify your biggest setback and turn it into a lesson, let's dig a little deeper into the next step of the ritual, the one that helps you build resilience and transform your mindset so you stop fearing failure and start embracing it as part of your journey. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to stay stuck in a loop after a failure? Maybe you bombed a test, missed a deadline, or got turned down for a job, and suddenly that one moment becomes the headline of your entire week. It plays on repeat in your mind like a broken record, reminding you of everything that went wrong. The truth is, we often give our failures way too much power. They don't just bruise our confidence, they end up dictating how we see ourselves. But what if, instead of being defined by those low moments, you could start treating them like raw materials, like messy, unpolished stones that you can actually chip away at until you uncover something valuable? The next step in making setbacks work for you is all about reframing. This is where you shift from asking, "Why did this happen to me?" to "What is this trying to teach me?" That small tweak changes the entire dynamic, because suddenly you're not the victim of the failure, you're the student. And being a student of your own mistakes is powerful, because it means you can learn, adapt, and level up faster than if you just tried to bury them. Think about it this way. Imagine you're training for a marathon. In the middle of one of your long runs, you collapse halfway through because you didn't pace yourself properly. If you only focus on the embarrassment, you will probably dread lacing up your shoes again. But if you pause and reframe, you realize the collapse wasn't just a humiliation, it was your body giving you direct feedback that you need to hydrate more, fuel properly, and maybe train smarter, not harder. That one failure suddenly becomes the reason you finish the race later on. Reframing isn't about sugarcoating things or pretending that failure feels good. It doesn't. It stings. But when you decide that pain is feedback instead of punishment, you begin to extract gold from it. The key here is to get specific. Instead of vaguely thinking, "I messed up," ask yourself, "What exactly went wrong, and what is this teaching me?" The clearer you get, the easier it becomes to spot patterns. Maybe you notice that every time you procrastinate on studying, you end up pulling an all-nighter and still getting an average grade. Or that every time you avoid speaking up in a meeting, you walk away feeling invisible. These patterns aren't accidents, they're signals. And once you start catching them, you can adjust your strategy before you repeat the same cycle again. Now, here's something important. Reframing isn't just about spotting the lesson, it's also about separating your identity from the failure. So many of us fall into the trap of thinking, I failed, therefore I am a failure. But the reality is, failing is an event. It's something that happens, not something you are. Picture it like this: if you're learning how to skateboard and you fall off while trying to land a trick, nobody would say, "Oh, you are a faller." They'd say, "You fell." That's it. The trick didn't work this time. Your identity doesn't change because of it. In the same way, your career setbacks, your academic struggles, your awkward social interactions, they don't define who you are. They just highlight areas where you're still practicing. Once you start separating the failure from you, something amazing happens. You feel free to experiment more. You're not so paralyzed by the fear of messing up, because you know that messing up doesn't make you broken, it makes you human. And the more human you allow yourself to be, the more resilient you become. Let's take this idea deeper with something you can actually try. The next time you feel that sinking feeling after a setback, pause and write down 3 sentences. What happened in plain facts, without judgment? What that event could be teaching you? Why this one setback doesn't define who you are? For example, I didn't get the internship I applied for. This might be teaching me that I need to practice interviewing more or tailor my resume better. This doesn't mean I'll never succeed, it just means this opportunity wasn't the one. That little exercise takes the sting out of the failure, reframes it into something useful, and reinforces your sense of self-worth. It's like mental first aid for your confidence. When you keep doing this regularly, week after week, you start to notice something incredible. You actually become more willing to take risks. Because if you're no longer terrified of failure, you're more likely to apply for opportunities you once thought were out of reach. You're more likely to try new strategies, raise your hand, volunteer your ideas, and go after things that once intimidated you. That willingness to try again is where growth explodes. And here's the part most people don't realize: your willingness to fail and learn doesn't just benefit you, it also inspires others. When your friends, classmates, or coworkers see you stumble, brush yourself off, and still move forward, it gives them permission to do the same. Failure becomes less taboo, less shameful, and more like a natural part of progress. You unknowingly become a mirror that reflects resilience back to them. And that ripple effect? That's gold too. This is why Fail Forward Fridays can be such a powerful habit. Because instead of ending your week by dwelling on everything that went wrong, you turn it into a ritual of extracting value. You're closing the chapter not with regret, but with reflection and direction. By doing that, you create momentum heading into the next week. You're lighter, clearer, and more motivated because you've turned your failures into fuel instead of baggage. And once you start turning failure into fuel, something else begins to shift: your relationship with pressure. Instead of crumbling under it, you start to see it as a challenge you're equipped to handle. You stop avoiding tough situations and begin leaning into them, knowing that even if you don't nail it, you'll still walk away with insights that make you stronger. Pressure no longer feels like a threat, it feels like an invitation to grow. Here's the truth: life isn't about never falling, it's about learning how to fall better, how to get back up quicker, and how to take something from the fall that makes you stronger the next time. Every successful person you admire, entrepreneurs, athletes, creators, leaders, they all have one thing in common: they've failed more times than most people have even tried. But instead of treating failure like a dead end, they treated it like a classroom. Every mistake was a teacher, every rejection a redirection, every no one step closer to a yes. So if you're sitting there right now, thinking about the test you failed, the job you didn't get, or the opportunity that slipped away, here's what I want you to remember: this is not the end of your story. It's just a plot twist. And sometimes, the best stories only get interesting after the setback. Let me leave you with this question: if failure couldn't stop you, if you knew it was simply a stepping stone, what would you dare to try next? Maybe it's applying for a scholarship. Maybe it's starting that side project you've been scared to launch. Maybe it's finally speaking up with your ideas instead of holding back. Whatever it is, I want you to carry this with you: failure is not the opposite of success, it's part of success. The only real failure is refusing to try again. So here's your challenge for this week: do your own Fail Forward Friday. At the end of the week, Grab a notebook and ask yourself, what was one setback I faced this week? What is the gold, the lesson, I can take from it? How will I apply this next week to move forward? Do this every week, and I promise you'll look back months from now and realize your failures didn't hold you back, they built you. Remember, the most persistent person may not be the smartest, but they always go the furthest. And if you're watching this video right now, I know you've got that persistence inside you. If this message hit home for you, don't just keep it to yourself. Drop a comment below sharing the biggest lesson you've learned from a failure. You never know who might need to hear your story today. And if you want more weekly inspiration like this, make sure you subscribe, because we're just getting started. Your story isn't over. In fact, it's only just beginning.